Scorpio. Pause for a moment, because the energy coming through this reading already feels incredibly intense from the very first cards. Someone has been thinking about you far more than they've ever admitted. On the surface, they may still seem calm, still trying to keep everything under control, still acting like they've got it all figured out. But underneath that exterior, there's a completely different story unfolding. This person seems to have spent a long time trying to move forward, trying to rationalize their feelings, trying to convince themselves that they could leave this connection behind. But what's interesting is, the more distance they created, the more they realized a part of their heart never really left. And honestly, I can feel regret here. I can feel emotions that were never fully spoken. Things that stayed buried beneath the surface for much longer than they should have. More than anything, I feel this growing awareness inside of them. An awareness that you may have meant far more to them than they ever allowed themselves to believe. It's almost like they're looking back now through a completely different lens. Old conversations, old memories, moments that once seemed insignificant, things they brushed past without fully understanding. And now, as they revisit those memories, they're beginning to realize something important. Some feelings don't disappear simply because we try to hide them. Some emotions don't fade just because we refuse to acknowledge them. Wow, that's a powerful realization. Because I feel like this person has spent a very long time trying not to look directly at what was sitting in their heart. But lately, that has become much harder to ignore. So as always, listen to your intuition. Take what resonates with your situation, and gently leave the rest behind. Because it feels like someone is slowly coming face to face with a truth they've been avoiding for a very long time. Okay, let's take a deeper look and see what this energy wants to reveal. The first thing I'm picking up here is someone who has spent a very long time trying to keep their emotions under control. Not because they didn't feel this connection, but because what they felt was much stronger than they ever expected it to be. At the beginning, this may have seemed simple. Maybe they thought you were just an interesting encounter during a certain chapter of their life. Maybe they believed everything would naturally fade away, just like so many other connections that had come and gone before. But you know, some connections leave the deepest imprint when we try the hardest to downplay them. And honestly, I feel like that's exactly what happened here. Because the farther they tried to move away, the more they realized they were still carrying you with them. Not in a loud way. Not through constant words or dramatic gestures, but in very quiet ways. Like hearing a random song in public and suddenly being reminded of a conversation the two of you once shared. Like catching a glimpse of a familiar place and instantly seeing your face in their mind. Like having an ordinary day with nothing unusual happening, only for a small memory of you to quietly return out of nowhere. I feel like this person has told themselves over and over again that they needed to move on. They tried to rationalize everything. They tried to push their feelings aside. They tried to keep themselves busy. But here's what's interesting. The harder they tried to control their thoughts, the more they realized the feelings were still there. The moon card comes through here with the energy of things that were never fully spoken. Emotions they never admitted to other people, and in some cases, emotions they never fully admitted to themselves. Because when feelings run that deep, people often become even more determined to hide them. From the outside, others may see someone who seems distant, someone who appears detached, someone who looks calm and unaffected. But beneath the surface, a lot more is happening than anyone realizes. I keep getting the sense that they replay the small moments between the two of you far more than the big ones. A sentence, a glance, a moment where the two of you laughed about something completely simple. A feeling of comfort they don't easily find around other people. And what stands out most to me is that they don't miss you simply because you're familiar. They miss the version of themselves they got to be around you. And that's very different. Some relationships stay with us because of habit, but some people stay with us because they touch something real inside of us. And honestly, this feels like that second kind of connection. The Six of Cups card appears here like fragments of memory that keep finding their way back. Not to pull them into the past, but to remind them that something about this connection never truly disappeared. There were times when they thought time would eventually soften everything, but instead, time gave them perspective. The more mature they became, the calmer they became. The more they realized their feelings for you were never as shallow as they once believed. And then the King of Cups card appears. Wow, this energy feels powerful. This is someone who feels deeply but reveals very little. Someone who can sit quietly without saying much at all. Yet inside, there is an entire ocean of emotion. I feel like they've spent a large part of their life trying to appear strong, trying to maintain the image that everything is under control, trying to make sure their heart never became the thing leading the way. But the challenge they're facing now is that the calmer they try to remain, the more clearly they understand the depth of what they're feeling. Because the Lover's card in this reading isn't only about love, it's about realization. The realization that some people enter our lives and leave a mark that lasts far longer than we ever expected. The realization that some connections cannot simply be forgotten through distance or time. And perhaps most importantly, the realization that sometimes the most confusing feelings aren't the ones coming from someone else. They're the ones coming from within. I feel like this person is standing at a very significant crossroads, a place where it's becoming harder and harder to deny what their heart has been trying to tell them. And as the first cracks begin to appear in those emotional walls they've spent so long building, another process is quietly unfolding beneath the surface. A process that is about to force them to look much more closely at the fears they've been carrying for a very long time. Because sometimes the reason a person pulls away isn't because they don't feel love. It's because they feel too much of it, and that can be terrifying. I feel like this person has spent a large part of their life trying to stay in control, controlling their emotions, controlling their thoughts, controlling the way they present themselves to the world. They're used to keeping everything at a safe distance, used to handling things on their own, used to making sure no one sees the most vulnerable parts of who they really are. But somehow, this connection reached the exact place they've spent years trying to protect. It made them feel seen. And for some people, being truly seen can feel even more frightening than being rejected. Because when someone sees the real you, those old defenses begin to lose their power. The familiar explanations stop working. The walls that once protected the heart start to feel heavier than the feelings they're trying to contain. The Hermit card comes through very strongly here. And honestly, this doesn't feel like loneliness because nobody is around. It feels more like stepping away from the noise in order to face yourself. There were periods when this person almost disappeared from the emotional world altogether. They spoke less, shared less, let people know very little about what was really going on inside. From the outside, that may have looked like indifference. But inside, there were conversations happening constantly. Because when everything becomes quiet, the things we've been avoiding often start speaking the loudest. And that's where the Nine of Swords card appears. Now, I don't see this as tragedy. I see it as awareness. I see someone beginning to recognize things they've ignored for far too long. Sleepless nights, thoughts looping through their mind, questions that nobody else is asking except them. Why did I react that way? Why did I pull away? Why did I stay silent when honesty was needed? Why do I keep running whenever something starts feeling too close? And what's interesting is, the deeper they go into those questions, the more they realize the issue was never really about anyone else. It lives inside old wounds that were never fully healed, old disappointments that taught them to close their heart, experiences that convinced them emotional dependence was dangerous. So every time their heart wanted to open, their survival instincts pulled them back, not because they wanted to hurt anyone, but because they were afraid of being hurt themselves. The Seven of Swords card carries a very specific feeling here. Not blatant dishonesty, not manipulation, more like avoidance. A person constantly looking for a way out of difficult emotional conversations, convincing themselves everything would eventually work itself out, redirecting their focus toward work, responsibilities, or other goals. But feelings have a strange way of surviving. You don't have to talk about them. You don't have to act on them. But that doesn't mean they're gone. In fact, sometimes emotions become even stronger when they're left unspoken. And honestly, I feel like that's exactly what this person has been experiencing. The distance they created was meant to protect them, but over time, that same distance became a mirror reflecting everything they didn't want to see, the fears, the regrets, the unnamed emotions, the truths they weren't ready to acknowledge. And then the Death card appears. Wow, not as an ending, not as something being taken away, but as the moment an old version of themselves begins to outgrow its own skin. The version that always avoided. The version that insisted they didn't need anyone. The version that kept emotional distance as a form of protection. That version is slowly losing its grip. And this transformation doesn't happen overnight. It happens little by little, quietly, gradually, but very deeply. Like water changing beneath the surface long before anyone notices the ripples above. And the strongest thing I'm picking up here is that they can no longer look at this connection through the same eyes they once did. Because the more they face themselves, the more they begin to understand that some of the things they once viewed as weaknesses may actually be leading them towards something much more important. A truth that's slowly emerging from the shadows. A truth that's becoming harder to ignore. And that truth may become the beginning of a profound awakening already unfolding within them. I feel like there was a moment somewhere along the way that completely changed how this person sees everything. Not a dramatic event, not a life-changing conversation. Nothing that would necessarily stand out to anyone looking from the outside. It feels more like someone walking down a familiar road and suddenly realizing they've been missing something important for a very long time. Because sometimes the biggest shifts begin with a very simple question. What if I've been wrong about this all along? And wow, sometimes a single question like that can start moving an entire worldview. The Judgment card comes through here with the feeling of an awakening that starts from within. Not because someone else arrived with all the answers, but because they're finally hearing a voice they've been ignoring for far too long. Things they once viewed through a lens of self-protection, they're beginning to see through understanding. Memories that once made them uncomfortable now seem to carry lessons they couldn't recognize before. And feelings they once tried to avoid are becoming feelings they want to face honestly. I feel like this person has gone through a period where everything on the outside appeared normal. Life kept moving. Responsibilities remained the same. The world saw the same version of them. But underneath the surface, something much deeper was happening. A powerful internal restructuring. Old beliefs are being questioned. Protective habits that once made them feel safe no longer seem to fit the person they're becoming. And when that starts happening, people are often forced to look at life from an entirely different perspective. The Star card carries such a beautiful energy here. It feels like someone slowly finding their way back to the light after walking through a long stretch of fog. Not because every challenge disappeared. Not because everything suddenly became easy. But because they're beginning to understand that they don't have to keep letting old wounds lead the way. There's a softness in this energy that feels very different from what came before. Almost like they're allowing themselves to believe something they stopped believing a long time ago. That this connection wasn't built on feelings alone. It was also built on patience, on waiting without forcing, on silence that never turned into resentment, on doors that remained open even when things became confusing. And honestly, I feel like this is the point where they're starting to see your role in their journey differently. Not through idealization, not through regret, but through genuine appreciation. They're beginning to recognize that there were moments when you saw the good in them before they could see it themselves. Moments when you believed in their ability to grow more than they did. And whether they expressed it or not, those moments left a much deeper mark than anyone realized. The Temperance card appears here like water slowly finding its balance again. The emotional extremes aren't as strong. The impulsive reactions aren't leading the way anymore. There's less urgency to prove something. Less need to defend every feeling. I feel like this person is learning how to slow down with their emotions. They're no longer trying to outrun everything that makes them uncomfortable. They're no longer searching for immediate answers. Instead, they're beginning to let things exist exactly as they are. Allowing themselves to miss someone without judging that feeling. Allowing themselves to feel regret without denying it. Allowing themselves to look at old mistakes without drowning in guilt. And honestly, that's a very different kind of growth. Not the kind that comes from knowing more, but the kind that comes from understanding yourself more deeply. And then the Death card appears once again. But this time, it doesn't carry the same heavy feeling. It feels more like a door quietly closing behind them. Not to take something away, but to create space for something new, a new version of themselves. Not a perfect version. Not someone who has never made mistakes. Not someone who has never been afraid. But someone who is finally beginning to stop running from themselves. I feel like this is one of those periods where profound changes are happening internally, even if nobody else can fully see them yet. Their thoughts are changing. Their priorities are changing. Things that once seemed important are changing. And alongside all of those shifts, another realization is becoming clearer. A realization that some things in life cannot be healed by time alone. Sometimes they require honesty, real honesty. And the deeper this person moves into this journey, the more it feels like they're being pulled toward the things they've never fully said out loud. I feel like the energy of this part is similar to someone standing in front of a door that's been closed for a very long time. Not because they don't know what's waiting on the other side, but because they know all too well. And that's exactly why they've been hesitating. Because sometimes speaking the truth isn't the hardest part. The hardest part is accepting that once the truth is spoken, things may never look quite the same again. I feel like this person has spent a long time keeping everything inside, unspoken thoughts, unsent apologies, feelings they convinced themselves they could handle alone. But emotions aren't like objects you can place in a drawer and forget about. Some things have a way of finding their way back to the surface the longer they're hidden. And honestly, there's something very powerful about this energy. It feels like they keep revisiting old conversations in their mind, not to assign blame, not to prove who was right or wrong, but to understand what really happened, to understand why certain moments have stayed with them for so long. There were things that seemed ordinary at the time, simple words, simple exchanges, moments that didn't appear significant. But the more they revisit them, the more they realize there were layers they couldn't see back then. There were times when you tried to explain yourself, times when you tried to open your heart, times when you offered them an opportunity to understand you more deeply. But at that point in their journey, they weren't truly ready to listen. And now, looking back, they're beginning to understand the difference between hearing someone's words and genuinely understanding what that person was feeling. The Ace of Swords card appears here like a beam of light cutting through fog that's lingered for far too long. Not every answer arrives at once, but certain truths are becoming impossible to ignore. The truth that they miss you more than they ever showed. The truth that they cared more than they ever admitted. And the truth that their silence never reflected the full reality of what was happening inside them. There's a very real sense of regret here, but it doesn't feel like regret over losing something. It feels more like regret over not showing up as the person they wish they could have been, not speaking more honestly when they had the chance, not being emotionally available when it mattered. You know, sometimes people only understand the value of a connection after they've stepped away from it, not because the other person changed, but because they changed. And when perspective changes, things that once seemed small begin carrying a completely different meaning. The Page of Cups card makes me think of a heart that's learning how to open again. A heart that no longer wants to remain at a distance simply observing. A heart that no longer wants feelings to exist only as thoughts. There's something incredibly sincere about this energy. Almost like they're relearning the language of emotion after speaking the language of logic for so long. They're not searching for perfect words. They're not trying to create a perfect image. What they're searching for feels much simpler. Honesty. The chance to say what they truly feel. The chance to explain things they never had the courage to explain before. And I also feel like they're beginning to understand something important. Some wounds don't heal through avoidance. Some misunderstandings don't simply disappear with time. And some emotions cannot be resolved by keeping them locked inside forever. The King of Cups card is still very present here, but this time the energy feels different. It's no longer about suppression. It feels more like an ocean that's finally stopped fighting the tide. They're beginning to accept what they feel, no longer arguing with their own heart, no longer trying to convince themselves that these feelings don't matter, no longer turning everything into a puzzle that needs solving. Because the more they analyze it, the more they realize this is something meant to be felt, not dissected. And then the Knight of Cups card appears, and honestly, this doesn't feel rushed at all. It feels sincere. It feels like someone finally deciding to take a step towards something they've been thinking about for a very long time. Not because every fear has disappeared, not because they suddenly have every answer, but because they've come to understand that some conversations are worth having. Some words deserve to be spoken. Some emotions deserve to be acknowledged. And some truths can only begin to heal once they're brought into the light. I feel like this person is standing very close to an important emotional threshold. A place where silence is beginning to feel heavier than honesty. A place where the heart is starting to speak louder than the mind can comfortably manage. And as that happens, another choice is quietly forming within them. A choice between continuing to live according to old fears, or, for the first time, truly listening to what their heart has been trying to say all along. I feel like this may be one of the most important stages of this entire journey. Not because everything around them is suddenly changing, but because something inside them is. A very different kind of decision is beginning to take shape. And the thing about decisions like this is that they rarely happen in a single moment. They're built slowly, through hundreds of thoughts, hundreds of conversations with yourself, countless moments of standing at a crossroads and turning back before taking the next step. And honestly, I feel like this person has been living in that space for quite a while. There are different voices inside them. One part wants to move forward. One part wants to retreat back into safety. One part wants to trust what they feel. And another part keeps searching for reasons to wait, reasons to postpone, reasons to stay where things feel familiar. But what's interesting here is that for the first time, the balance doesn't seem to be leaning toward fear the way it once did. The Emperor card comes through with the image of someone slowly reclaiming ownership of their own life. Not through rigid control, not through forcing outcomes, but through maturity, through finally understanding what they truly want. Because there are periods in life when we allow circumstances to make decisions for us. We let our past make decisions for us. We let other people's opinions decide what's right for us. And after a while, we forget what it feels like to live according to our own truth. I feel like this person was influenced by outside voices more than they realized. Advice from others, expectations from others, ideas about how they should live, who they should love, what they should avoid. And for a long time, they tried to do what seemed reasonable, what seemed safe, what seemed right. But there's a huge difference between doing what's right for everyone else and doing what's right for yourself. And that's something they're finally beginning to understand. The Seven of Wands card carries a fascinating energy here, because it feels like they're learning how to protect something deeply important. But this time, they're not protecting themselves from their feelings. They're protecting those feelings from the things that used to suppress them. And honestly, not everyone is going to understand that. Some people may think they're changing. Some people may feel uncomfortable seeing them grow beyond the version they've always known. Some people may question their choices. But growth often requires accepting that not everyone will walk beside us through every stage of transformation. And that doesn't make anyone wrong. It simply means people are traveling different paths. I feel like this person is gradually letting go of the need for outside approval. They no longer want every decision to be validated by someone else. They no longer want their heart to become a committee vote, because the more they listen to themselves, the more they realize the answer has been there all along. They just weren't quiet enough to hear it before. The Justice card appears here like a balance slowly being restored. Not balance between two people. Balance within themselves, between logic and emotion, between the past and the present, between what they fear and what they genuinely desire. And there's something very beautiful about that, because I don't see them looking back at old choices with self-blame anymore. I see them looking back with understanding. They recognize that every decision they made came from the level of awareness they had at the time. And when awareness changes, choices change too. That's not failure, that's growth. The Strength card carries one of the most powerful messages in this reading, because this isn't the strength of defeating someone else. It isn't the strength of controlling a situation. It's the strength of being honest with yourself. You know, some people can face the entire world without hesitation, but they're terrified of facing their own heart. And honestly, I feel like that's the challenge this person has been working through. They're learning how to stop running from what they feel, learning to stop treating vulnerability as weakness, learning that caring deeply about someone doesn't make you less strong. If anything, it often takes tremendous courage to admit that someone truly matters to you. And for the first time in a long time, I don't feel like this person wants to make decisions based on fear anymore. They don't want to stay in constant defense mode. They don't want old wounds continuing to write the story of their present life. Instead, they're beginning to ask themselves a different question. What if fear wasn't making the decision? What if they no longer needed to prove anything to anyone? What if they simply listened to their heart? Then what would they truly want? And the moment that question starts becoming clearer, another door begins to open. A door that no longer revolves around how they feel, but around what they're willing to do with those feelings. I feel like the energy of this part is very different from everything that came before. We're no longer sitting in those quiet internal conversations. We're no longer in that stage of simply observing, reflecting, and trying to understand. It feels like after a very long journey, this person is beginning to look ahead more than they look behind. Not because the past no longer matters, but because they understand that the past has served its purpose. The lessons have been recognized. The wounds have been acknowledged. And the things that needed to be understood are finally starting to make sense. Because when someone truly moves through a period of transformation, the next question usually isn't, why did this happen? The next question becomes, okay, what do I want to create from here? The Ace of Pentacles card comes through like a seed being placed into fresh soil. It's not flashy, it's not loud, but wow, it carries so much potential. And what I'm picking up here isn't a desire to reconnect simply because they miss you. It doesn't feel like temporary emotion either. It feels like a desire to build something stronger than what existed before. Because as people grow, the way they view love begins to change. They stop thinking only about feelings. They start thinking about stability, trust, consistency. They start thinking about what two people can actually create together. And honestly, I feel like that's the perspective they're beginning to develop now. They're no longer focused only on what's been lost. They're no longer focused only on what wasn't perfect. Instead, they're looking at what could still be nurtured, what could still grow. The Ace of Wands card brings in a completely different kind of energy. If the Ace of Pentacles card is the foundation, then the Ace of Wands card feels like the spark, the inspiration, the motivation, the feeling of wanting to live more honestly with what they truly believe. And after everything they've been through, I feel like something inside them is beginning to light up again. Not impulsiveness, not urgency, just a growing realization that they don't want to remain standing still anymore. You know, there are moments in life when we realize that waiting longer doesn't necessarily bring more clarity. And that's often the moment we begin moving toward what matters most. The Fool card appears here, and it makes me think of a very particular kind of courage. Not the courage of someone who has never been afraid, but the courage of someone who understands fear very well and chooses to open their heart anyway. Because honestly, the hardest thing isn't starting over when you've never been hurt. The hardest thing is maintaining your ability to trust after life has given you every reason to be cautious. And I feel like that's exactly where this person is standing right now. They're no longer the version of themselves that reacted purely from self-protection. They're no longer the version that always needed an exit strategy before giving feelings a chance. Instead, they're learning how to move forward without carrying so much armor. One step at a time, slowly, carefully, but sincerely. The Ten of Pentacles card brings in such a warm feeling. Because this energy isn't about fleeting moments. It speaks about something deeper, something more mature, something with a longer view. I feel like they're beginning to understand that the things most worth having usually take time to develop. Trust takes time. Understanding takes time. A lasting connection takes time. And maybe for the first time, they no longer see time as the enemy. They no longer view delays as proof that something failed. Instead, they're beginning to see those delays as part of the growth process itself. Because honestly, if everything had happened while both people were still older versions of themselves, it might have been viewed through a completely different lens. But now, I don't feel like either person is standing in the same place anymore. Experiences have changed perspectives. Challenges have changed the heart. Even the silence has changed the way things are understood. And then the Lover's card appears once again. What's interesting is that I don't experience this card here as a simple love story. I experience it as a choice made after understanding yourself more deeply, after facing your fears, after walking through difficult lessons. Because mature love isn't about finding a perfect person. It's about becoming honest enough to show up authentically in front of another human being, without the old masks, without emotional games, without needing silence or distance to prove your worth. Just honesty, presence, and a genuine desire to build something meaningful together. And honestly, that's the energy I'm feeling here. The energy of a new chapter. Not because every problem has disappeared, not because every question has been answered, but because the most important things have already started changing from within. And sometimes, those internal changes become the very foundation for everything that's quietly beginning to take shape ahead. And that's what I'm picking up from the energy of this reading. If something in this story spoke to your heart, keep the parts that truly resonate with your own journey and gently let the rest drift away. Because sometimes the most important thing isn't knowing exactly what comes next. Sometimes it's simply understanding that every experience, every emotion, and every period of silence helps us see ourselves a little more clearly. Thank you for spending this time with me and staying all the way to the end of the reading. Honestly, your presence here means more than I could ever fully put into words. And if you enjoy readings that explore the deeper emotional layers of these connections, the healing, the growth, and everything in between, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments if you feel comfortable doing so. I always love reading your stories and seeing the experience this community shares with one another. So wherever you are on your journey right now, I hope you're giving yourself the same patience, compassion, and understanding that you so often give to others. Take care of yourself. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing this space with me. And I'll see you again in the next reading. Until then, goodbye for now.